It's bad bitch o'clock, yeah, it's thick 30. I've been through a lot, but I'm still flirty. Is everybody back up in the building? It's been a minute, tell me how you're healing. Cause I'm about to get into my feelings. How you feeling? How you feel right now? Oh, I've been so down and under pressure. I'm way too fine to be distressed, yeah. Oh, I'm not the girl I was or used to be. But I might be better. Turn up the music, turn down the lights. I got a feeling I'm gonna be alright, okay, alright. It's about damn time. Turn up the music, let's celebrate. I got a feeling I'm gonna be okay, alright. It's about damn time. In a minute, I'ma need a sentimental man or woman to pump me up. Feeling fussy, walking in my Balenciennes, trying to bring out the fat bit lust. Cause I give a fuck, way too much. I'ma need like 2 shots in my cup. Wanna get up, wanna get down. That's how I feel right now. Hello, 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 everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Drop in that chat. Welcome. Share your name, pronouns, role, organization, and why you chose to be here today. Welcome to Embracing Equities webinar series, Real Talk, Real Action. We thank each and every one of you for your action in joining us in this space today. We host these webinars because we want to hold a space to talk about important issues. And we want to help each other move into action. Why action, you might ask? I'll tell you why. Because the grip that racism, oppression, inequity has on us as a collective can be crippling. It can cause us to freeze. It can cause us to be hopeless. So thank you again for being here with us today. Before we hearken back to 10 years ago, I want to acknowledge what's on top for me today. And that is that we are collectively dealing with, grappling with the murder of Sonia Massey. For those of you who might not know, Sonia called the police to her home to do what we expect police officers to do when we're in trouble, to protect her. However, from the moment they arrive, she is treated like a criminal. She's treated as if she is the threat. The brief interaction resulted in her death. All of it captured on the officer's body cam video. So let's take a collective pause for Sonia Massey and for us as we are grappling with this. Please use the chat to drop in what you're feeling, or drop in the chat hashtag Sonia Massey. Take a moment. Yes, I see rest in power, Sonia Massey. Yes. Drop in the chat what you're feeling about that right now. Yes. That's heavy, y'all. So before we jump into that, let's take a collective deep breath together. Yes. All right, thank you. So, who's this person talking to you? You might be wondering. Hi, y'all. I'm Dr. Nicole Evans, and I serve as the Senior Director of Leadership at Embracing Equity, and I will also be serving as your host today. I currently live in St. Louis, where I was born and raised, and where Michael Brown Jr. was murdered just 10 minutes away from the home that I grew up in during my teenage years. It has been 10 years. 10 years since the spotlight of injustice was placed on Ferguson, Missouri. 10 years since the knowing that people of color and our allies had around racial injustice happening daily in our neighborhoods. 10 years since the worst nightmare of any parent happened during the day. 10 years since Michael Brown Jr. was murdered. Many things have happened during this time, and yet I'm still pondering, what did we learn from this tragedy? Has St. Louis made any changes? What does this mean for all of us? Can we really achieve racial equity? As I think about what happened 10 years ago, I'm reminded of my emotions on that day during that time. First, there was anger. I was angry about this. A young Black male with a future. He was headed to Vatterott College after high school, who was unjustly cast under the vision of racism, cast as inhuman, cast as a threat, cast away as his body lay on the ground for hours. I was also met with two other feelings. One of them was the impending fear for my own Black sons, knowing that this could have been them. This could have been my extended family members and friends. An impending fear that this could also have been any of my former students. The other feeling, the last feeling that I remember having, was one of restlessness in my body, in my spirit. I had an almost unshakable, palpable feeling in my body that I needed to do something. So, a decade later, what I want to share with our listeners and viewers today is the place where this occurred looks different. I've been to the spot on Canfield many times. In fact, I visited this past weekend in preparing myself to be emotionally ready for this webinar today. I shared that space with a family from out of town. There have been some visible changes. There have been some visible resources added to the community, and many of them have come from the formal calls to action and the work of Forward Through Ferguson. So today I'm eager to speak with my panelists, Nichole Murphy, so that we all can hear about how this. First, I want to hear how it impacted her personally and what has come out of your work, Nicole's work at Forward Through Ferguson. So, a little bit about her. Nichole Murphy is an equity-minded and passionate systems thinker and community builder with 7+ years of community engagement, facilitation, and project management experience. She currently serves as the Director of Community Partnerships at Forward Through Ferguson and is a founding board member of For the Ville. Nicole's work is deeply rooted in challenging systems that perpetuate inequity and fostering community engagement. Join me, y'all, in welcoming Nichole Murphy. All right.
Oh gosh. Thanks, Nicole. Yeah, from one Nicole to another Nicole.
Yeah.
Thank you for that introduction and the invitation to share this space with you. I'm excited and glad to be here and to be able to talk about this tenure. It's been 10 years.
Yes, it has. So I shared a little bit about the personal impact that it had for me. Nichole, can you share with us how the events of Michael Brown Jr.'s death impacted you first personally?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, so I am not originally from St. Louis. I am originally from Maryland, not the DMV. I'm from the Baltimore side of Maryland. But I had been in St. Louis for undergrad. I graduated from WashU in 2014. So if
Mm.
we're looking at a calendar, I graduated in May of 2014. And then I went home
Mm.
and was not in St. Louis when August 9th happened. And gosh, did I want to be here.
Mm.
I was seeing, sort of the news media's take on what was happening. I was having to, I found myself in a position of having to try and explain to the people that I grew up with, in a sense, and was working with at the time, like, this is why this is happening. I understand
Mm.
that this is what the news media is showing you and telling you about the people who are part of this uprising, who are out here, you know, trying to be heard. And it
Mm.
is far more complex than to say, people are rioting and looting. Like, that's not really what was happening. And so I, I was doing that in my interpersonal relationships and conversations with people that I was working with directly, but I also was writing about it on my blog. And it sort of became a space for me. You talked about your emotions following it. It became a space for me in particular to write out what I was feeling in relationship to police and fatal state violence, as well as, microaggressions and all sorts of other things experienced as a Black person living in this country.
Mm.
And so it seemed fairly removed to the people that I was living near and working with. And then, of course, again, if we're looking at a calendar and we're following timelines, shortly after, Freddie Gray was, killed in police custody in Baltimore.
Hmm.
And the conversations then became much more heated. And where I was working, I had an older white woman. And I have known this, at this point, I had known this woman for, I don't know, 7 or so years. It's a long time. We had worked together for a long time. And she said some really, and I should have asked, am I allowed to be my full,
Yeah.
say the words I want to say and
Say
not
what you
send.
want to say. Say what you want to say.
Yeah, well, she said some pretty fucked up shit
There you go. Yep.
about Freddie Gray. And, I was the only Black person in the room. So she clearly safe to say it, but she basically said that he got what he deserved. That's when I was like, oh, I got to get the hell up out of here. Like, this isn't for me. These are not my people. It's scary and, quite frankly, could be dangerous for me to be here. And so I had decided when I left school in 2014 that I wanted to go back to school. And what that ended up being for me was to go to social work school. And I am happy to have a whole conversation with anyone else who wants to talk about the harms and the very tricky, problematic history of social work and continuing, history of social work. But I went back, got my MSW. I found some community here. So Nicole mentioned that I'm a founding board member of For the Ville, a historically Black neighborhood on the north side. And I found some real community, and the folks that I was working with there, I was like, cool, I'm back in St. Louis. St. Louis is home.
Yeah.
I feel safe here. And then I, somehow through some degree of divine intervention based on how the job description came to me, ended up at Forward Through Ferguson. And that, yes, shout out For the Ville. And I'm here because I deeply understand how anti-Black racism
Yeah.
shapes everything that happens in this country. Has
Yes.
happened, continues to happen, and not just in this country. I mean, globally. Um, and in order for me to feel safe and comfortable and to be able to thrive as opposed to survive, and to have that for all people, we really have to, deal with the systems that perpetuate those inequities and that oppression.
Yeah. So let's keep going there. How did the events shape your journey in the field? Let's go a little bit deeper of racial equity, and what does that mean for us today? Like talk us through that.
Yeah. I don't think, and I don't know if other people have had this moment. Identity is certainly a journey. Um,
Mhm.
and because I grew up where I grew up with the people I grew up, my identity journey is, I would say it was delayed.
Mm.
Um, and it wasn't until I was, in my early 20s where it became apparent to me that where I grew up, who I grew up with, were harmful um, to my, positive identity development, particularly as it relates to me being a Black woman. And
Mm.
um, that how that shaped all of the things that I believe and continue to believe, and how just drastically different that was from all of the voices I was hearing around me. And I mean, that continues to this day. I mean, I'm certainly in this work because it is vital to
Mm.
um, a liberatory future in which, again, everyone is free, um, and isn't, afraid of fatal state violence, or afraid that because of their ethnicity or their nationality or their religion, or their race, that they could be erased from the planet at any moment in time.
Yes.
And so, I mean, what's really getting me sort of hot in this moment are the just the genocide of the Palestinian people. And
Mm.
um, as a student of history, I know that the United States continues to support that, but has historically always supported the um, the perspective that what is good for for people financially is ultimately good for everyone,
Mm.
which is not true, and particularly harmful when we think about eugenics. There likes to be this separation as if it was something that only happened over here. But
Yes.
actually, we had lots of really prominent eugenicists in this country who were a part of that whole movement. There were companies that were making profit, were war
Mhm.
profiteering during World War II, and uh, I will not name them, but they are still in existence.
Yeah.
Sure. Who were war profiteers. And essentially, it was only when it became super personal that the country was like, okay, I guess we have to do something now. And
Yeah.
it's frustrating that we're in a similar position, where there are lots of people on the ground. There are lots of people globally in every country, in every situation. I mean, talking about how harmful and how horrible this is. And the response is like, well, what can we do? We can't stop companies from doing things that they want to do. oh no, we
Yeah.
definitely can't make policies that would stop, Israel from doing anything that Israel is doing. We also know that's false, right? Like this country puts sanctions on lots of other countries all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And so people might be wondering, why is that important for us?
Yeah, I mean, it's particularly important in this conversation. I'm not sure if folks are as aware, but when the Ferguson uprising was happening in 2014, folks on the ground were getting advice and hearing from organizers in Palestine about like how to deal with tear gas. They were like, look, we've been through this. We recognize your struggle as deeply connected to our struggle, and here's what we have for you in order to help you. And I think it is um, it is incredibly important for us to recognize that our liberation is wrapped up in everybody else's.
Oh, yeah.
Like I've said this before in a different context, but I have no interest in, right, like my organization works specifically in the St. Louis region, but we also hope to have a more national reach. And that is because I have no interest in there being a racially equitable St. Louis in the middle of a non-racially equitable United States. Like that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
And so it is incredibly important that we see our struggles and our fights for liberation as tied to each other. And like I saw somebody in the chat mention like the genocide of indigenous people, it's the same.
Yes.
It's the same. This is definitely tied to land back and to decolonizing. And it is certainly important that if we are going to have liberation, that it is liberation for all people.
Yeah. And you often refer to Fannie Lou Hamer. What do you say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm wearing my Fannie Lou Hamer pin right now, which is that nobody's free until everybody's free. And
yes, yes, yes.
I see that too, and not just in our relationship with people, but also in our relationship with nature and with the earth. And we'd look real silly if we were all free living on a planet that it doesn't have the capability of housing human life anymore. Like it's
all connected. Yeah. At Embracing Equity, we always say our liberation is bound together, and it is. It is. And, speaking of bound together and liberation, and nobody's free unless everybody is free, I also believe we need to prepare ourselves to really support one another. We need to rally around, you all know, what I'm going to say, Kamala for president, to protect this multiracial democracy. Here's the thing. We accept that there's a lot of valid critique about her. And we know that we need to be ready to expect some harmful narratives around her. Here's what we know. Both things can be true at the same time. We actually are going to be hearing and seeing more misogynoir viewpoints. So,
yeah, I mean, I think it's important to recognize, as I'm sure lots of folks do, that because of intersectional identities, there are needs to sort of break down the impacts of different kinds of oppression as they relate to people differently, right? So like misogyny is not the same as misogynoir, being that this term coined by Black feminist writer Moya Bailey is to define the specific hatred, dislike, distrust, and prejudice toward Black women. Right. It's a combination of misogyny and noir, which is the French term for Black, but it is absolutely important to recognize that whenever, regardless of who it is, so like in this situation, it's Kamala, sure, but whenever a Black woman is put somewhere for public consumption, right, that the response to her, to them, to those, the critiques that they receive are not the same as the critiques that would be offered up for someone else in that same position.
That part. Yes. And this has shown up and will continue to show up now that she's running, and certainly if she wins. And so remember, we started at the top, real talk, real action. And so the action steps for us are to watch out for the blame game, to understand that microaggressions will show up. And it is our job collectively on this call to be an ally and disrupt it. And to remember, our liberation is bound together. So we're going to drop in the chat an article that really talks about how to do this and how to show up. Because we know research shows that Black women in particular experience these microaggressions 5 to 15% more than white women and other ethnicities. And so there might be some people on here saying, well, okay, but what about Michael Brown Jr.? So let's get to it. We just oppression, inequity, and really pushing and leaning into allyship is super important. So let's shift back, Nichole, just for a moment. Let's move into your specific work at Forward Through Ferguson, right? This organization that was created following this horrible incident that happened. Can you tell us a little bit more about the mission and the work of Forward Through Ferguson?
Yeah, so following the killing of Michael Brown Jr., right, there was pulled together by the governor what's called the Ferguson Commission. And the Ferguson Commission took a lot of time. They reviewed, historical data. They talked to community members to really try and understand, like, what brought us to the conditions that led to the killing of Michael Brown. And as a result, excuse me, and as a result, they released the commission report. Okay. In the commission report, there is 189 calls to action. I do think it is important to note that that was the compromise number. There were far more, but they compromised on 189 calls to action. And knowing that the Ferguson Commission was set up and was time bound, the organization that I work for, Forward Through Ferguson, is, sort of the direct link to the Ferguson Commission. And so we are embracing the mandate from the commission report, and we use those 189 calls to action as like a guiding star or a North Star for the kinds of work that needs to happen for us to move to racial equity in the St. Louis region. And then for our organization in particular, our mission is to center impacted communities and mobilize accountable bodies to advance racially equitable systems and policies that ensure all people in the St. Louis region can thrive.
Awesome. So 199, that is a staggering number. And to your point, that's a compromise. There were far more. Coming from St. Louis, I can feel it. Like we felt it every day. There was this layer of inequity that, really, particularly people of color, were feeling every day. And so what would you say are some of the key initiatives that have been implemented, actually not just talked about, over this past decade?
Yeah. Contextually, I think it's important that we are talking about systems change work. And so that is not the work of one organization. as nice as it is that Forward Through Ferguson, directly linked to the commission, we are not achieving 189 calls to action by ourselves.
Right.
And so one thing that has been and has always sort of been incredibly promising about this region for me as someone who is a transplant is the love and the pride that folks have in being from St. Louis, despite directly despite and sometimes because of the very history that we are hoping to move beyond in changing the systems and the policies that govern the ways that we operate in the region. So I'm going to talk about things, but they are not necessarily things that Forward Through Ferguson has either led specifically, but have either been a part of or supported or been on the periphery of. And then they will be mostly more recent. My tenure with the organization is I joined in 2022.
Okay. Yeah.
Wow. Wild. But later on, Daisy will drop in the chat a bunch of links to some resources that Forward Through Ferguson has produced to help folks understand how things have been changing incrementally over the last 10 years. So what I'm going to highlight right now are things that are still ongoing and are super exciting for me, at least. So Forward Through Ferguson's sort of bread and butter, what we do is trailblazing research and data collection, storytelling, and we do racial equity capacity building. We are working on justice philanthropy, which I will get into a little bit here in a second. But what we do is we take that data, we take the stories, we think about calls to action in relationship to the lived experiences that we're hearing from folks in the region and from what the data is telling us. And then we want to push for policies for change, or we want to pilot things as potential solutions. And so some quick examples of that are transforming 911. I'm not sure if folks have seen this data and advocacy tool, but essentially we partnered with Datalytics and we looked at 1 million plus 911 calls that were made in the county, city data forthcoming. But really what that showed, in addition to the storytelling, I think to no one's surprise, is that the system as it exists now is not really working for anyone who is connected to it or has to call 911. And one of the sort of larger calls to action or solutions that we are sort of zeroing in on is the idea of a non-police first responder alternative. So these exist in other cities and other parts of the country, and we're saying, why not here? And so we have reconvened our First Responder Alternative Coalition that is ongoing. We are just starting to sort of get into the meat of that work, but at the end of it, the idea is to be able to have the funds and the community vision to pilot a program in the county that would be non-police first responders. So we're aware, right, that there's like cops and clinicians. We believe that the goal ultimately, and as we started up top, right, with that example of Sonia, we believe that limiting the instances where folks have to be involved with armed law enforcement are ultimately more for our community and more for our safety. And so we're pushing for a non-police first responder alternative. What has been super exciting as well is all of the organizers with the Close the Workhouse campaign.
Goodness,
Right?
yes.
So the building is empty. It is not closed. The building is empty, which is a huge win, right?
Huge.
But now the campaign is like, we got to come back together because we have to hold the electeds accountable, because they pulled together this commission of sorts to talk about what to do with the building now, and they don't want to take the recommendations of the commission that they pulled together, right?
And Nicole, we have lots of people on here who are not from St. Louis, so they may not know what the workhouse is. So can you give a quick blurb about the importance of Close the Workhouse and what the workhouse was here in St. Louis?
Yeah, absolutely. So in relationship to work around mass incarceration, pretrial detention, criminalization of, you know, minor offenses, all of these things that were talked about in the Ferguson Commission and deeply experienced by people across the U.S. and certainly in this region. The workhouse was a jail. I think it was the medium. No, was it the medium security?
Maybe.
Anyway, yeah. It was a jail. It had, like, you know, on record quoted hellish conditions, where people would die on the inside. There were, I mean, you can.
And this were for minor offenses, maybe unpaid traffic, like that.
And mostly, yes, short term.
Short term.
And it was mostly like pretrial detention, which is another thing that we're continuing to work on, and in terms of the justice for all space, is limiting the jail population, particularly around pretrial detention and bail. But anyway, so folks who had been directly impacted, had spent time in the workhouse, came together with some other social justice organizations for this campaign to shut it down. Essentially, there is no one in the building right now, and the city is trying to reimagine what to do with that space, because it is owned by the city. And they pulled together a commission, which also included people who were directly impacted by the workhouse. And, you know, the workhouse campaign continues because we are dissatisfied with what the city has initially offered as what to do with the space. Wow. And then sort of the last thing I'll mention real quick, because in relationship to holding our electeds accountable, Forward Through Ferguson, along with some of our friends at other social justice organizations, Action St. Louis, Art City Defenders, Missourians to Abolish the Death Penalty, MacArthur Justice Center, Freedom Community Center, I really hope I'm not leaving anybody off the list right now, are a part of the prosecutor organizing table. And we just released the second report, the second prosecutor watch report. The first one was an introduction to the table, the metrics that we're using to evaluate the prosecutors, both in the city and the county. And what was just released was the evaluation of the prosecuting attorney's office in the county. And so it is it's supremely important, especially since you were talking about elections earlier, Dr. Evans. It is supremely important that we recognize that lots of the positions of power in these systems that do harm to our folks are elected folks. And it is also important. It is also important, right, that the work doesn't stop when you get people elected, right?
Yes.
The same groups came together to help elect the current prosecuting attorney in the county, and also the former prosecuting, or the circuit attorney in the city. And this report is evidence that we're still watching you.
Yes.
we are abolitionists in nature, and so we are not for any prosecutor really. But while you are in this position, we are hoping that you are focusing on doing as little harm as possible to our communities. And so I would recommend that everybody look at that report and go read it. There is one for the city that is forthcoming, but these are elected positions, right? Like people go to the polls and they vote for folks, and we still have to hold folks accountable even after they've been elected.
I was just about to say that accountability piece is super important. Y'all, we are going to open it up in a little bit for Q&A. So if you have some questions, be thinking about those. But I definitely want to continue to move, through this. I'm an educator by nature, by trade. So I'm particularly interested in the educational efforts and initiatives. Is there any of those that you can share, knowing that there were 189 calls and you might not be able to pull that up right off the top of your head, but were there anything in the area of education initiatives that come to mind?
Yeah, absolutely. We, as taken from the commission report, there were a couple of major priority areas that Forward Through Ferguson has also taken on as its priority areas, one of them being youth at the center. And so we have done several initiatives around youth at the center. We have worked with other organizations that are doing work in the education space. I think it might have already been dropped in the chat. Thank you, Daisy. But there is, a community accountability and advocacy tool called Still Separate, Still Unequal.
Yes.
Which looks at the education system in St. Louis. One of the major things that we can take from the data and from the lived experience is that the funding formula is sort of a linchpin in how St. Louis public schools are able to operate and still at this level of inequity. So that has happened, and we see, sort of continually every year SLPS saying, well, we got to close more schools because we don't have the money and we don't have the enrollment, et cetera. So really trying to take a look at the root cause issues for things. And so there is an accompanying, like a really great accompanying video that was narrated by our previous executive director, David Dwight, which really sort of helps explain in a nutshell, the idea of like what's happening upstream. Like it's cool to just take a look at what's happening and sort of do some Band-Aid patches to things, but we'll continue to have issues if we're not looking upstream and thinking about the root causes of things. There is also a little bit of a follow-up on that. We did, I think, is it still compromising? There's a series of like mini conversation reports around the impact of COVID. And one of them also focuses on what we saw in relationship to education around the impact of COVID. And there's also some great organizations. If folks have not looked at what We Power is doing, We Power early education space is advocating for so many things. For our babies, including trying to tackle the childcare crisis that we're experiencing in the St. Louis region. And there is a lot going on and not just from, nonprofit organizations, but from parents who are coming together and like they want to support SLPS, the Louis public schools, and they're like, but we also, again, accountability is the word, right? Like
accountability. Yes. So you've talked about some of the community projects and things that have been really impactful that you're still working with, transforming 911, cops and clinicians, the first responder
Yeah, we're doing
alternative.
clinicians.
Oh, okay. Okay.
No.
No.
Non-police first responder alternative.
Gotcha. Okay. Non-police first responder alternative. Okay. Got it. Got it. And like, can you mention one or two and how the community has responded to those initiatives?
Yeah. I mentioned earlier, and I said that we would come back to it, but Forward Through Ferguson is one of the areas where we seek to find impact is in justice philanthropy, which as a Black-led organization doing social justice, racial equity, racial justice work, what is known through the data about philanthropy is that these kinds of organizations receive minimal funding in relationship to what is available. And we could get into all that data and those statistics, but we do not have time.
Yep.
And so what was very exciting for me coming in is I got to work very immediately on the Racial Healing and Justice Fund pilot. And that came from a call to action in the Ferguson Commission report for there to be an endowed racial equity fund.
Yes.
This went through a wonderful community design process where folks who were at Forward Through Ferguson at the time, talked to lots and lots of community members to understand what the priorities were, where should that funding be going, et cetera. And the pilot landed on focusing on racial healing and racial justice. Those were so broadly defined so that it allowed for, maximum space for folks doing work in community, in their own communities with their own ideas and solutions to be able to be eligible for funding. And so this is work that typically, while we recognize as being incredibly important, there are some gatekeeping and exclusionary practices in philanthropy that would have kept these folks from receiving funds. And so that pilot has wrapped up. And so we went through 3 cycles of funding. The reinvested like $1.2 million into the smaller grassroots efforts and organizations and communities around the St. Louis region. And we're very excited we're wrapping up the evaluation process of the pilot, and we're very excited to think about where to go next, particularly because some very key decisions were made for the 3rd cycle, which allowed us to get a much greater understanding of what the need was for this kind of funding in the region. And while we said, we only have $800,000 to grant out this cycle, we received like well over $10 million worth of funding requests.
Wow.
The gap,
the need is there.
Yes. And so we're very excited to be able to connect to those individuals, those organizations that have these ideas and that are actively working in their communities to solve some of these systemic issues and to be able to help them find those resources. And so that's the justice philanthropy work that we're doing. On one hand is the, sort of directing grant funds and that in their direction, but it's also, doing some capacity building work for folks that are working in traditional philanthropy to be like, look, you got to shift the ways in which you're engaging with community. You've got to shift the ways in which you're determining folks are eligible for funding and for what funding they're eligible. And you've got to think about being more of a co-conspirator in the work, just like dropping money here and there.
Yeah, I think that's to me what that sounds like is that's that upstream work, right?
Mhm.
You have the people there, there's a need, they want the money, and then upstream you have people making decisions about who gets it, and they're not actually listening to the people. So that's one of the things, takeaway for me, the work of Forward Through Ferguson, that storytelling, that interviewing the people, that asking the people, what is it that you need? Not making a decisions for them, but making a decision with them. And I love that. So I certainly, I could go on and on with this conversation, but I also want to open it up for questions from folks who are here. So but I do want you to speak to two things. You know, remember this is called Real Talk, Real Action. And
Mhm.
so we know that there are challenges to this work about, my question was, can we achieve racial equity in St. Louis and beyond? That's my question. I grapple with that. That's why I do the work that I do at Embracing Equity. I think there's an answer to it. I think we can. And I know it's a journey that we all are on. And so, Nichole, if you would share, briefly about some challenges that we have, and then let's both share what's the call to action as folks are putting questions
Mhm.
possibly in the chat. Brief barriers and call to action.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is impossible given this sort of political moment and the position that St. Louis finds itself in perpetually, right? Like Missouri is a city. St. Louis is a city within the state of Missouri.
Yep.
Um, and because of the way things work in our charter, blah, 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 all of this like legal
Yep.
nonsense.
Systemic. Yeah.
There are only so many things that we can really realistically push for in our region at a like um, state level policy
Yeah.
kind of thing. Um, and I also so we have a system of government um, and that is not particularly conducive to sort of rapid prototyping or
Mm-hmm.
solution or necessarily being solutions based.
That's real.
Um, we operate in a capitalist system in which right like the what's making the most money makes the
Yeah.
most sense
Yep.
apparently. And so there's not a lot of political will. There's not a lot of like resource or moneyed power behind some of these things. And then, I really just have to call out the judicial branch right now. And this is not St. Louis specific, but the judicial branch right now is way, 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 way out of control.
Yeah.
The conversations that we are having internally around equity because of decisions that have recently been made by judges and by justices are going to make it incredibly hard for us to move forward in our work and being full out in the open about it.
Yeah.
Forever there has been resistance and we can find ways to resist, but it certainly feels like we're moving backwards
Yes.
instead of forward a lot of the time. And then I think in terms of actions that folks can be taking, I think continue to put pressure on your elected officials, continue to work on accountability, um, continue to put pressure on news media and other outlets that are pushing particular agendas
Mm.
that are not for us being racially equitable and are not for our liberation.
Mm.
Um, let's see. Hyper locally, it is the 10-year commemoration of Michael Brown Jr. We are working with Michael Brown Sr.'s Chosen for Change organization. Every year they do events to commemorate their son. So that is Michael Brown Jr.'s father and his mother, his stepmother, Cal. And we are working with them. And there is a whole slate of activities and events that are happening that just like show up to them.
Yes.
B, donate money. C, you can also volunteer.
Yes.
You're a physical person. And then for folks that are not in the St. Louis region, like find the Forward Through Ferguson equivalent in your neighborhood, in your city, like who's doing systems change work, who's doing policy work, and support them. You can also support Forward Through Ferguson. We will take money, but we also, if you are interested in any of the sort of the racial equity capacity building offerings that we have, there should be somewhere in the chat at some point a link to an interest form for that. Yeah.
Yes. And also, don't forget Embracing Equity. We work nationally with folks around these things as well. We are in it for the work. We are committed, and we are going to be your co-conspirators in this work. And so I am asking folks to join us. I'm going to join the August 9th, 9 a.m. All Roads Lead to Ferguson Unity March. It will start at Normandy High School, the high school where Michael Brown Jr. had recently graduated from, and it will march into the site of his murder. So I hope to see y'all there. I'll be there with my Embracing Equity shirt on. We are here in the fight with you. We walk shoulder to shoulder with you in this work nationally, wherever you are. We'll drop that in the chat. And so, are there any questions for us? If you'll drop them in the chat, we'll try in these last 2 to 3 minutes to answer them for you. Yeah. Okay. Yep. Katie asked, takeaways: put pressure on elected officials, speak up to create accountability. Yes, there it is. Pressure news media and other outlets pushing agendas. Is that correct? That is correct, Katie. Work with your equivalent of Forward Through Ferguson. Reach out to Embracing Equity. We have tons of work for you. We will do these webinars every month on different topics. Lean into the conversation. Listen, I'm going to tell you something. Get uncomfortable. Some of these conversations and this work is about being uncomfortable. Move out of your comfort zone. Move out of your comfort zone and join us in this. And so, not seeing many other questions. I do have one question for yes, sign up for a free coaching session with me. I will coach you through anything you'd like coaching with. It's a free session. So we have 2 more minutes. And before we go, I'm going to ask Nicole, I'm curious, what book or books are on your nightstand right now? I want to know, what are you reading?
Yes. I love talking about books. Anybody feel free to reach out to talk about books. So I'm going to mention 2 things. One I am currently reading, and one I have read and continued to think about because it seems incredibly relevant always for this work. One is What It Takes to Heal by Prentice Hill. Really speaking about how we go into this change work and what it requires of us to change internally, to deal with our own trauma, so that we can be in space with other people, and to be in space with other people fighting for those changes. And then the other is The President and the Frog. And my particular part, yes, truly a gift. My particular sort of interest in this is the idea that we can be as radical as we want to be. We can be as anti-establishment as we want to be.
Yes.
And at the same time, we have to figure out what the vision is for the alternative.
Yes.
There will come a time when we're in power. And if we do not have that locked down, then we run the risk of, sort of falling back in line with the way that systems have been built before for similar impact and outcomes. And so it's incredibly important for us to be visioning and thinking about, like, yes, absolutely, this is not working for us, but what would work
Awesome.
in that moment that we do come to power.
Awesome. Thank you, Nicole, for everything that you brought today. How can the people reach you? I know they can reach Embracing Equity on all the social medias, at Embracing Equity, www.embracingequity.org. Will you let us know how we can reach you before we sign off?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can visit Forward Through Ferguson at forwardthroughferguson.org. On socials, we are at STL Change. And then me personally is my first name, Nichole, at forwardthroughferguson.org.
All right. Thank you all for joining us. You will receive the recording and some follow-up email. Thank you so much for this important conversation. 10 years. 10 years. Let us all remember Michael Brown Jr. Thank you. Thank you.